They said I was disrespectful and fired me in front of everyone during the biggest deal of my career. What they didn't know was that I had enough connections and capital to buy their main competitor within 6 months. If you enjoy stories of corporate justice and strategic revenge, smash that like button and subscribe for more. My name is Catherine, and I thought I knew everything about corporate politics until the day Richard Blackwood decided to make an example out of me. I had been working at Pinnacle Financial Services for 3 years, climbing from junior analyst to senior dealmaker faster than anyone in the company's history. At 28, I was their youngest director, and I had just spent 6 months orchestrating what would become the largest merger in our firm's history. The conference room on the 42nd floor of our Manhattan office was packed that Tuesday morning. Representatives from Meridian Industries sat across from us, their legal team flanking their CEO, James Morrison. The deal was worth $200 million, and everyone knew it would make or break our quarterly numbers. I had been the lead negotiator from day one, building relationships, structuring terms, and navigating the complex regulatory requirements that came with a deal of this magnitude. The environmental compliance reports are still outstanding, Morrison was saying, his fingers drumming against the mahogany table. My board won't move forward without complete transparency on the Chicago facility. I leaned forward, my prepared response ready. Mr. Morrison, I understand your concerns, but our independent audit clearly shows that the facility meets all EPA standards. The delay you're referring to is purely administrative. We can have the final certification by Friday. That's when Richard Blackwood, our CEO, suddenly stood up. His face was red, a vein visibly pulsing in his forehead. Catherine, that's enough. You're being disrespectful to our clients. The room fell silent. I felt my stomach drop, but I kept my composure. I'm sorry, Richard. I was simply addressing Mr. Morrison's concerns about the timeline. No, you were being argumentative and unprofessional, Blackwood snapped, his voice echoing in the suddenly quiet room. This is exactly the kind of behavior that makes clients uncomfortable working with us. I could feel every eye in the room on me. Morrison looked genuinely confused, as did his team. They had been working with me for months, and we had developed a solid professional relationship. Richard, perhaps we could discuss this privately, I said quietly, trying to salvage what was left of my dignity. There's nothing to discuss, he replied coldly. Catherine, you're fired. Security will escort you out. Sarah will take over the remainder of this negotiation. The words hit me like a physical blow. Sarah Martinez, a junior associate who had been with the company for barely a year, looked as shocked as I felt. She had been taking notes in the corner, learning from the process, but she had never led a negotiation of this scale. Richard, this is highly irregular, Morrison interjected. Ms. Catherine has been exemplary throughout this process. If there's an internal issue, perhaps we should reschedule. No need, Blackwood said firmly. Sarah is perfectly capable of handling the remaining details. Catherine, security is waiting. I stood up slowly, my hands trembling slightly as I gathered my materials. 3 years of my life, countless late nights, missed dinners, sacrificed weekends, all ending in this moment of public humiliation. The security guards who appeared at the door looked apologetic but determined. Mr. Morrison, I said, turning to face the client one last time. It's been a pleasure working with you. I'm confident that Pinnacle will take good care of you moving forward. Morrison stood up and extended his hand. The pleasure has been mutual, Catherine. I hope our paths cross again in the future. As I shook his hand, I caught something in his expression that I would remember later. It wasn't pity or embarrassment on my behalf. It was something else entirely. Respect, maybe. Or perhaps recognition that he had just witnessed something fundamentally wrong. The walk from the conference room to the elevator felt like a mile. My colleagues stared from their cubicles and offices, some with sympathy, others with the cruel satisfaction that comes from watching someone else's downfall. I kept my head high, my shoulders back, even as my world crumbled around me. In the elevator, one of the security guards, an older man named Frank, who I had always been friendly with, spoke quietly. For what it's worth, Ms. Catherine, everyone knows you didn't deserve that. Blackwood's been looking for a reason to get rid of you for months. Why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You were making him look bad. Everyone knew you were the real talent behind those deals. Word is he's been telling the board that he's been doing all the heavy lifting, but the clients kept asking for you specifically. The pieces started to fall into place. The sidelong glances during meetings. The way Blackwood had started taking credit for my work in board presentations. The sudden exclusion from certain client dinners. I had been so focused on the work itself that I had missed the political machinations happening around me. By the time I reached the lobby, my initial shock had transformed into something else entirely. Not sadness or self-pity, but a cold, calculating anger. I had been in this business long enough to know that reputation was everything, and Blackwood had just attempted to destroy mine in the most public way possible. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated me. That evening, I sat in my apartment overlooking Central Park, a glass of wine in my hand and my laptop open on the coffee table. I had spent the afternoon making phone calls, reaching out to contacts, testing the waters. The response had been overwhelming. Clients I had worked with over the years expressed shock at my termination. Competitors who had always respected my work were suddenly very interested in having conversations. Most importantly, I had received a call from James Morrison himself. He had left the meeting at Pinnacle shortly after I was escorted out, citing concerns about the company's stability and management practices. The deal was off the table, at least for now. Catherine, he had said during our conversation, I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what happened today. Richard Blackwood just cost his company a $200 million deal because of his ego. I appreciate you calling, Mr. Morrison, I had replied. I know this situation has put you in a difficult position. Actually, it's clarified things for me, he said. I've been thinking about your proposal for months, but I've also been thinking about the person behind it. You're the reason I was comfortable moving forward with Pinnacle. Without you there, I'm not sure I trust their ability to execute. That's when he made the offer that would change everything. I'm having lunch tomorrow with David Chen from Apex Capital. They're Pinnacle's biggest competitor, and they've been courting my business for years. Would you be interested in joining me? The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The humiliation of the previous day was still fresh, but it was now fuel for something bigger. I dressed carefully in my navy blue suit, the one I always wore for important meetings, and made my way to the Four Seasons restaurant in Midtown. David Chen was already seated when I arrived, his silver hair perfectly styled and his handshake firm and confident. At 55, he was a legend in the financial services industry, known for his aggressive acquisition strategies and his ability to spot talent that others overlooked. Catherine, he said as I sat down, James has told me quite a bit about you. I have to say, what happened yesterday at Pinnacle was unfortunate, but it might just be the best thing that ever happened to both of us. Over lunch, David laid out his vision for Apex Capital. They were already the second largest financial services firm in the city, but they had been struggling to break into the high-end merger and acquisition market that Pinnacle had dominated for years. We have the capital, we have the infrastructure, but we've been missing the relationships and the expertise, he explained. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, though I was already beginning to understand where this conversation was heading. I'm proposing that you become our new Director of Strategic Acquisitions, David said. But more than that, I'm proposing that you help us build something that will fundamentally change the landscape of this industry. The offer was generous. More than generous. The salary was 30% higher than what I had been making at Pinnacle, plus equity in the company and performance bonuses that could potentially double my annual income. But it was David's long-term vision that really caught my attention. I've been watching Pinnacle for years, he continued. Blackwood has been coasting on the reputation that people like you built for him. He's lazy, he's arrogant, and he's made more enemies than he realizes. The company is vulnerable, and I think you know exactly where their weaknesses are. I did know. I knew which clients were unhappy with Blackwood's management style. I knew which deals were hanging by a thread because of his unwillingness to put in the detailed work required. I knew which employees were frustrated and looking for opportunities elsewhere. What you're suggesting sounds like corporate warfare, I said carefully. David smiled. I prefer to think of it as strategic competition. We're not going to do anything unethical or illegal. We're simply going to be better than they are. We're going to provide superior service to clients who deserve it, and we're going to offer opportunities to talented people who are being held back by poor management. James Morrison, who had been quietly listening to our conversation, finally spoke up. Catherine, I pulled my deal with Pinnacle this morning. Not because I'm angry about what happened to you, though I am, but because I no longer trust their ability to execute. If you were to join Apex and personally handle my account, I would be very interested in moving forward. The implications were staggering. The Morrison deal wasn't just worth $200 million to whichever firm handled it. It was a gateway to Morrison's entire network of business contacts, other CEOs and executives who trusted his judgment and followed his lead. I need some time to think about this, I said, though in truth I had already made my decision. Of course, David replied. But I should mention that I'm not the only one who's been watching your career. I've had calls from 3 other major clients of Pinnacle just this morning. Word travels fast in this industry, and people are paying attention. That afternoon, I walked through Central Park, my mind racing with possibilities. The anger I had felt the day before was transforming into something more focused and strategic. This wasn't just about getting revenge on Richard Blackwood, though that was certainly part of it. This was about proving that talent and dedication mattered more than politics and ego. I thought about my father, who had built his small manufacturing company from nothing through sheer determination and hard work. He had always taught me that success was the best revenge, but that revenge without a greater purpose was just destruction. What David was offering wasn't just a job. It was a chance to build something meaningful while also proving a point. By evening, I had made my decision. I called David and accepted his offer, with one condition. I wanted to be involved in the strategic planning for competing directly with Pinnacle. I wanted to help build a company that would force them to be better, or watch them fall behind. I was hoping you'd say that, David said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I started at Apex on a Monday morning, and by Friday, I had already begun reaching out to contacts throughout the industry. The response was even more positive than I had expected. Clients who had worked with me at Pinnacle were eager to hear about Apex's services. Competitors who had always respected my work were suddenly interested in partnerships and collaborations. Most importantly, I began to understand the true scope of what we were building. David had been planning this expansion for months, quietly assembling resources and waiting for the right opportunity. My arrival, and the circumstances that led to it, had provided the catalyst he needed. We're not just going to compete with Pinnacle, he told me during one of our strategy sessions. We're going to become the firm that everyone else aspires to be. We're going to set new standards for client service, for employee development, and for ethical business practices. The irony wasn't lost on me. Richard Blackwood's decision to fire me had been motivated by his desire to maintain control and take credit for my work. Instead, he had handed his biggest competitor the exact expertise and relationships they needed to challenge his dominance. But I was just getting started. The real test would come when we began actively competing for major clients, when the industry would see whether my success at Pinnacle had been a fluke or a preview of what was to come. 3 months into my tenure at Apex Capital, I had already closed 2 major deals that Pinnacle had been competing for. The industry was taking notice, and the trade publications were starting to run stories about the talent war between the 2 firms. What they didn't know was that I was playing a much longer game. My office at Apex was on the 38th floor of a gleaming tower in the financial district, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a perfect view of the harbor. It was from this vantage point that I began to orchestrate what would become the most significant corporate acquisition of my career. The key was information. Over my 3 years at Pinnacle, I had developed relationships throughout the industry, and those relationships were now providing me with insights that were invaluable. I knew which clients were unhappy with Blackwood's increasingly erratic management style. I knew which deals were in trouble because of his unwillingness to invest the time and attention they required. Most importantly, I knew which employees were quietly looking for opportunities elsewhere. The talent drain is accelerating, I told David during one of our weekly strategy meetings. I've had calls from 4 more Pinnacle employees this week alone, senior people who are frustrated with the direction of the company. David leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. That's good news for us, but I'm more interested in your thoughts on their client portfolio. Are there opportunities for us to compete more directly? I had been waiting for this question. There are, but I think we should be strategic about it. Going after their clients one by one will be effective, but it's not going to create the kind of impact we want. We need something bigger. What did you have in mind? I pulled out a folder I had been preparing for weeks. Technova Industries. They're Pinnacle's largest client, worth about $400 million in annual revenue. Their contract is up for renewal in 6 months, and I happen to know that their CEO, Lisa Martinez, has been increasingly unhappy with Blackwood's handling of their account. David's eyes widened. Technova? That's a bold move, Catherine. If we could land them, it would be a game changer, I finished. But it's not just about winning their business. It's about demonstrating that we can compete at the highest level. Technova is a prestige client. Other companies watch what they do and follow their lead. The plan I had developed was complex but achievable. Technova was a technology conglomerate with interests in everything from software development to renewable energy. They required a financial partner who could handle multiple types of transactions simultaneously, from venture capital investments to large-scale mergers and acquisitions. Pinnacle had been handling their account for 7 years, but I knew from my time there that they had been coasting on the relationship. Blackwood rarely met with Martinez personally, delegating most of the work to junior associates who didn't have the authority to make strategic decisions. Meanwhile, Technova's business had grown exponentially, and they needed a partner who could keep pace with their ambitions. I've been doing some research, I continued, and I think there's an opportunity for us to propose something that Pinnacle can't match. Technova is planning a major expansion into the European market over the next 2 years. They're going to need local partnerships, regulatory expertise, and access to capital markets that Pinnacle simply doesn't have. David nodded slowly. But we do? We will. I've been in preliminary discussions with Rothschild & Co. in London. They're interested in a strategic partnership that would give us access to their European network. Combined with our domestic capabilities, we could offer Technova a truly global platform. The next 6 weeks were the most intense of my professional life. I worked 18-hour days, building relationships with Technova's executive team, developing detailed proposals for their European expansion, and coordinating with our potential partners overseas. Every detail had to be perfect, because I knew we would only get one chance to make our case. Meanwhile, I was also monitoring Pinnacle's activities through my network of contacts. What I learned was both encouraging and disturbing. Blackwood had become increasingly paranoid about the competition from Apex, and he was making decisions based on fear rather than strategic thinking. He had implemented new policies that restricted employees' ability to communicate with clients directly, requiring all interactions to go through senior management first. The result was a significant decline in client satisfaction and an increase in internal turnover. He's self-destructing, I told David during one of our conversations. But we can't count on that. We need to be prepared to win this competition on our own merits. The breakthrough came when I received an unexpected call from Lisa Martinez herself. I had worked with her briefly during my time at Pinnacle, but we had never had an extended conversation. She was calling, she said, because she had heard about my move to Apex and was curious about our capabilities. "Catherine, I'll be direct with you," she said during our phone call. "I've been increasingly frustrated with Pinnacle's service. Richard Blackwood seems to think that our relationship is guaranteed, and he's been taking us for granted. I'm open to hearing alternatives." The meeting with Technova was scheduled for the following week. Martinez would be joined by her CFO and her head of strategic development. It was exactly the kind of high-stakes presentation that I had been preparing for my entire career. As I sat in my office that evening, reviewing my notes and preparing my materials, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. The humiliation I had experienced at Pinnacle had been transformative, but not in the way that Richard Blackwood had intended. Instead of destroying my career, it had forced me to discover capabilities I didn't know I possessed. The next morning, I received a call that would change everything. It was from Martin Webb, the CEO of Meridian Industries, the company that had been in negotiations with Pinnacle on the day I was fired. "Catherine," he said, "I hope you remember me. I was in the room when Richard Blackwood made his unfortunate decision regarding your employment." "Of course, Mr. Webb. How can I help you?" "Well, that's an interesting question. You see, we never did complete that deal with Pinnacle. After you left, the negotiations fell apart rather quickly. Sarah Martinez, bless her heart, simply didn't have the experience to handle the complexity of the transaction. Now I'm wondering if there might be an opportunity for us to work together in a different capacity." The irony was perfect. The deal that had been the catalyst for my termination was now being offered to me as an opportunity to compete directly against my former employer. But Martin Webb had something else in mind, something that would prove to be far more significant than a single transaction. "I'm planning to make some major changes to Meridian's business model over the next year," he continued. "We're looking at several potential acquisitions, and we need a financial partner who can help us navigate the process. I've been impressed with what I've heard about Apex Capital's capabilities." As we talked, I began to understand the full scope of what he was proposing. Meridian wasn't just looking for a financial advisor. They were looking for a strategic partner who could help them acquire smaller competitors and consolidate their market position. The potential value of such a partnership was enormous, easily worth more than everything I had worked on during my entire tenure at Pinnacle. But there was something else. Something that Webb mentioned almost casually at the end of our conversation that made my pulse quicken. "You know, Catherine, one of the companies we're looking at acquiring is actually a direct competitor to Pinnacle. Sterling Financial Services. They're about 60% of Pinnacle's size, but they have some very interesting client relationships and a strong reputation in the market. If we could acquire them and merge their operations with a top-tier financial services firm..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. I could see exactly where this was heading. The Sterling Financial Services acquisition changed everything. What had started as a competition between two firms had evolved into something much more significant, a complete restructuring of the industry's power dynamics. Sterling was indeed a formidable competitor to Pinnacle, with annual revenues of approximately $300 million and a client portfolio that included some of the most prestigious names in technology and healthcare. They had been struggling with succession planning after their founder's retirement, making them an ideal acquisition target for the right buyer. The deal I structured for Meridian Industries was complex, but brilliant. Rather than simply acquiring Sterling outright, we created a three-way partnership that would allow Meridian to gain control of Sterling's operations while positioning Apex Capital as their exclusive financial services partner. The result was a new entity that combined Sterling's client relationships with Apex's growing capabilities and Meridian's industrial expertise. "This is unprecedented," David Chen said as we reviewed the final terms of the agreement. "We're not just gaining a competitor. We're creating an entirely new model for how financial services can be integrated with industrial operations." The announcement sent shockwaves through the industry. Overnight, the combined entity became the largest financial services firm in the region, with total assets under management exceeding $2 billion. More importantly, we had acquired direct relationships with over 40% of Pinnacle's client base. The press coverage was extensive and largely positive. The business journals focused on the innovative structure of the deal and its implications for the industry. But I was more interested in the reaction from Pinnacle itself. Richard Blackwood's response was swift and predictable. Within hours of our announcement, he had called an emergency meeting of Pinnacle's board of directors. According to my sources inside the company, he had ranted for over an hour about unfair competition and corporate espionage, making wild accusations about my conduct and demanding that the board authorize legal action against Apex. The board, however, had been watching the situation develop with growing concern. Pinnacle's financial performance had declined significantly over the past 6 months, with several major clients either terminating their contracts or reducing their engagements. The loss of the Morrison deal had been just the beginning. Other clients had followed suit as word spread about the company's internal problems. Blackwoods lost the confidence of his own board, David told me after receiving a call from one of his contacts. They're starting to ask serious questions about his leadership and the company's strategic direction. The final blow came when Lisa Martinez announced that Technova would be moving their account to Apex Capital. The decision was based, she said in a public statement, on our superior capabilities and our commitment to providing the kind of strategic partnership that her company required for its global expansion. We need a financial partner who can grow with us, Martinez told the Wall Street Journal. Apex has demonstrated both the vision and the execution capabilities that we're looking for. Catherine's leadership of their team has been exceptional. The Technova announcement was followed by a cascade of other client defections from Pinnacle. Within 2 weeks, they had lost over $600 million in annual revenue, representing nearly 40% of their total business. The company's stock price plummeted, and there were rumors of a potential bankruptcy filing. But the most satisfying moment came when I received a call from James Morrison, the CEO whose deal had been derailed by my termination 6 months earlier. "Catherine," he said, "I wanted to call you personally to congratulate you on everything you've accomplished. What you've built at Apex is remarkable, and I think you should know that you've earned the respect of everyone in this industry." "Thank you, James. That means a lot coming from you. I also wanted to let you know that I've been in discussions with several other CEOs who worked with you at Pinnacle. We're all in agreement that what Richard Blackwood did to you was not just wrong, but destructive to the entire industry. There's been talk of a formal complaint to the Professional Ethics Board. The irony was complete. The man who had tried to destroy my reputation had instead destroyed his own. But I took no pleasure in Blackwood's downfall itself. My satisfaction came from what I had built in response to it. 3 months later, I was standing in my new office on the 45th floor of our headquarters, looking out at the city that had once seemed ready to reject me. Apex Capital was now the premier financial services firm in the region, with a client roster that included some of the most successful companies in the world. The success had attracted attention from beyond the financial services industry. I had been invited to speak at conferences, to write articles for trade publications, and to serve on boards of directors for nonprofit organizations. But more importantly, I had been able to create opportunities for other talented professionals who had been overlooked or undervalued by their previous employers. Sarah Martinez, the junior associate who had been thrust into my role at Pinnacle, was among the first people I hired at Apex. She had struggled with the impossible situation that Blackwood had created, but she was fundamentally talented and deserved a chance to develop her skills properly. "I still can't believe how everything turned out," she said during one of our team meetings. "When I saw what happened to you that day, I was terrified that the same thing could happen to me. The difference is that you'll never have to worry about that here," I replied. "We're building a company where talent is recognized and rewarded, not threatened by insecure leadership." David Chen had been true to his word about building something meaningful. Apex Capital had become known not just for our financial performance, but for our commitment to ethical business practices and employee development. We had established mentorship programs, continuing education initiatives, and a culture of transparency that attracted the best talent in the industry. As for Richard Blackwood, he had been forced to resign from Pinnacle 6 months after my termination. The company had been acquired by a private equity firm that immediately implemented massive restructuring. Most of the employees had been laid off, and the Pinnacle name had been retired entirely. I learned about Blackwood's fate through a mutual acquaintance who mentioned seeing him at a networking event. He was apparently working as a consultant, trying to rebuild his reputation and find a new position. According to the acquaintance, he had approached several people at the event, asking if they knew of any opportunities, but his reputation in the industry had been severely damaged. "He actually asked about you," the acquaintance told me. "He wanted to know if you would be willing to meet with him, maybe discuss the possibility of him joining Apex." The request was both surprising and predictable. Blackwood had always been more of a politician than a businessman, and politicians understood the value of making peace with their former enemies. But some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him that I would pass along his request, but that I thought his chances were slim." He didn't seem surprised. I never responded to Blackwood's overture. There was nothing to be gained from revisiting that relationship, and I had more important things to focus on. Apex Capital was expanding internationally. We were developing new service offerings, and I was building the kind of career that I had always dreamed of. The final vindication came almost exactly 1 year after my termination. The industry association that I had belonged to throughout my career announced their annual awards, and I was selected as Financial Services Professional of the Year. The recognition was based on my role in developing innovative approaches to client service and my contributions to raising ethical standards throughout the industry. Standing on the stage at the awards ceremony, looking out at an audience that included many of the most successful professionals in the field, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The humiliation I had experienced at Pinnacle had been painful, but it had also been transformative. It had forced me to discover strengths I didn't know I possessed, and to build something that was truly my own. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of resilience, of turning setbacks into opportunities, and of never allowing others to define your worth or limit your potential. I spoke about the responsibility that successful professionals have to create opportunities for others and to maintain the highest ethical standards in their work. But I also acknowledged the role that adversity had played in my success. "Sometimes," I said, "the best thing that can happen to you is to have someone doubt your abilities. It forces you to prove them wrong, and in the process, you discover what you're truly capable of achieving." As I left the stage that night, I thought about the phone call I would make to my father the next morning. He would be proud, not just of the recognition I had received, but of the way I had handled the challenges that had led to it. He had always taught me that success was the best revenge, but that revenge without purpose was just destruction. I had built something meaningful, something that would outlast any individual recognition or award. Apex Capital had become more than just a successful business. It had become a model for how companies could treat their employees with respect and dignity while still achieving extraordinary results. The young woman who had been escorted out of Pinnacle Financial Services in humiliation was gone. In her place stood someone who had learned that true power comes not from titles or positions, but from the ability to create value for others while remaining true to your own principles. Richard Blackwood had tried to destroy my career because he saw me as a threat to his own position. Instead, he had given me the motivation to build something far greater than anything I could have achieved while working for him. The best revenge, as my father had always said, was indeed success. But the best success was the kind that lifted others up while you climbed.